Hello and welcome back to the paddock. Today we are talking all things China Grand Prix, and what an interesting one it was. On today's episode, you have Melissa, Casey, Ito, and myself, Hannah, and Chelsea behind the scenes. So let's just go ahead and dive on in with Melissa on some updates.
So we're back in Shanghai for the first time since 2019. We all know what happened in the world in early 2020 that caused for some travel restrictions in China, in turn caused for the race to either be canceled since then or just not included in the calendar. So I'm super glad to have it back and see a race happen at a different track that I haven't seen yet as a kind of a few years into the sports fan. So I was really looking forward to that. And going into the race weekend, of course, there's always that fun leading up to the weekend. We saw the drivers bring out the special race helmets. I definitely think they were holding out, and they definitely were, and saving their cool helmet ideas for Shanghai this weekend. And it was definitely worth the wait because one of my favorites was Alex Albon's Panda helmet, which was cool but kind of creepy. At the same time, depending on like where the when they were doing that front camera while he was driving, yeah, kind of weird.
Yeah, it was honestly very weird to me. It kept throwing me off on photos, and I don't know whether or not to be creeped out or cute vibes, but I was more creeped out by it was just those top eyes that threw me off or whatever. I was just like, no, but yes.
It was like one of those, like wherever you move, the eyes is like always just like staring right at you, like constant eye contact. But one of my favorite ones was Joe's, having his special helmet for his home race. I love the inspiration from the Shanghai Underground and the landmarks. He had his own idea of doing something different, and I think it was definitely super, super cool.
Also loved George's helmet. It looked like he put a lot of thought into it because he had like the longest caption ever, explaining it. And it was always great to see some fellow like Year of the Tiger representation on there.
Yeah, and Valtteri Bottas also had an interesting helmet this race weekend. It was red with what appeared or looked like flames that were like gold. It was very intricate design. I think he made a comment, and Ito, correct me if I'm wrong, that he thought that more drivers were going to go for like the red vibes, and then he ended up being like one of the only. But it was a really cool helmet, and you definitely could not miss that in his car, especially with like the neon green and the black, and then like just the red. Couldn't miss it.
Yeah, definitely not. And he and Joe both said they thought more drivers were going to go for the red, which is hilarious. And of course, with Valtteri's helmet, Tiffany, his partner, designed it again. And that to me is always just chef's kiss that she does all the designs.
Now moving on into the racing part of the weekend. There was only one practice for the Chinese Grand Prix due to it being a sprint weekend, which didn't really give the drivers or the teams a lot of time to adjust to be on a circuit that they just haven't been on since 2019. It also didn't help that a red flag occurred, not due to any like car or anything, but due to the fact that the grass just randomly caught fire just off to the side of the road, potentially due to like a spark or something, but it was just kind of wild just seeing like a burning patch of grass off to the side of the track. So definitely an interesting start to the weekend.
I really wish there was a way to figure out how to like fit an extra practice session on these sprint weekends. Especially like Casey had just mentioned, like no one has raced at this track since 2019. And for some of these drivers, it's the first time ever. So like I just feels like it's a disaster waiting to happen when they don't have like all that essential data and everything that they need to ensure a smooth and good race day. But that's me.
It's actually funny you say that because in some of the post-race sprint talks and the post-race sprint talks or post-race talks, they had mentioned that some drivers like the extra practice sessions so they can understand the look and the feel of the track, and then some prefer not. just due to it kind of leaves everybody on an even playing field when it comes to advantages and disadvantages, and they can't really tweak the car that much because they don't have that much time. But it was a very rainy weekend, so the fire was something for sure to see, but not once but twice. Like, how for Shanghai being known as a pretty rainy like atmosphere, that was definitely interesting and kind of crazy to see.
Yeah, that fire happening twice, once in free practice and once in sprint qualifying, was definitely something to see. And actually, the FIA later came out and said it was likely due to sparks flying off the cars when they passed by that section. Do I believe that? Not really, but we'll move on. So, sprint quali. SQ1, everyone impeded everyone. And I honestly attribute that to the fact that we haven't raced here in a while. Just to put into perspective how long it's been, Lando, George, and Alex only had 3 races under their belt the last time they raced there, and Max only had 5 wins to his name. Just putting everything into perspective. So, what else? SQ1, except for the fire, there didn't happen that much. But after the session, it started to rain, which meant a delayed SQ2. And in SQ1, we lost Logan, Yuki, Alex, and the 2 Alpines. And due to the rain, starting only 5 minutes before SQ2, it meant that everyone was basically scrambling to get a so-called banker lap in before the rain got too heavy and they basically lost all grip and everything else. So again, it was a free-for-all. But it meant Zhou ended up in the top 10 because he got out of SQ2. But we sadly lost Lance, Danny, Nico, Kevin, and George Russell. And for SQ3, the track, as predicted, very much turned into a slip and slide, which caused Charles to go into the wall. Thankfully, it was early enough that he was able to pit and repair any of the superficial damage that he had. Lando almost also went off, and everyone else pretty much had track limit violations. So a lot of deleted laps. And at the end, Lando was on pole for a hot second. Due to a track limit violation the lap before, that lap originally got deleted, but then they realized they deleted the wrong lap and reinstated his pole lap. So he did end up on pole. And honestly, I don't know about anyone else, but I had a heart attack when that whole thing went down. So we ended up with pole Lando, P2 Lewis, P3 Alonso, P4 Max, P5 Carlos, P6 Sergio, P7 Charles, P8 Oscar, P9 Valtteri, and then of course P10 Zhou.
I just want to add, aside from a wild card top 3 for the sprint race, because that can be a whole debate on what happened, I'm just ecstatic to see Zhou up there. I love seeing him in the top 10. I'm always rooting for that man, and seeing him up there got me really excited for him.
So, what actually happened in the sprint now? Well, we got excitement from the start with Lando going wide in turn 1.
Yeah, it looked like Lewis had a pretty great start off the line, and he was able to kind of like, get up right next to Lando in front of him. And while Lando was trying to get that back, he just went wide, and like, I don't know, I think probably everyone's heart dropped when you just saw him like, off to the side, off the track. And then someone like made a meme about it where it was like, about the Sochi thing, and it was like died, 2021, born 2023, and Lando liked it. So luckily he was able to find some humor in that, but it was just kind of, a sad way to start if you're a Lando fan, I guess.
I definitely screamed at the TV when I saw Lando go off and into the gravel and then falling back in the seventh. And he really wasn't able to gain any placement for there. It was almost kind of like, I don't know, I'm only guessing here, that he was just like, okay, we're good. I'm just gonna chill here. I think he gained one more position to get 6, but then he just kind of like chilled. I don't know if it was lack of pace from the car or if he was just like terrified of gravel, especially since the first time he raced there, he wrecked. So he's probably trying to prevent that from happening again.
I mean, honestly, he wasn't the only one struggling in the opening laps because Max seemed to also struggle in the opening laps. And then, thankfully, his race engineer, GP, came to the rescue and gave him some mode switches to try. And that kind of solved his whole race. And he started being the Max we know.
Yeah, it sounded like his battery basically wasn't deploying, so he wasn't able to get like that extra boost that you can apply, and which, if that didn't never worked, we would have had a very different sprint race. But he was barely able to hold off. I think it was Carlos was like trying to get by him, because Carlos had the battery deployment, but Max didn't. So luckily, like that was able to get fixed. Because it was just like a rocket ship after that. He was just off he goes.
And once Max got going, we had the stewards looking at Joe for going off track and gaining a place on his teammate. Thankfully, no further action because that would have sucked to get a penalty or a grid drop or whatever at your home race. And by lap 7, Alonso, who started in the top 3, was a proverbial sitting duck for Verstappen, who, as Casey said, was in a rocket ship.
Yeah, Fernando was basically fighting for his life in that Aston Martin because it really didn't look like it had quite the same pace as literally everyone around him. So, but he was still able to, like, defend and stop people from passing him, even though he didn't have the DRS, or they did, or something like that.
And then of course around lap 9 Lewis went wide and Max was just catching up with everyone. And also, can we talk about the battle for third on lap 15, because it was chef's kiss. And also, Carlos and Fernando fighting. Hello?
Yeah, that was a defensive masterclass from Fernando. It reminded me of some of the races we had last year. I think it was like with Checo in Brazil, where he was, holding him off and then passing him and all of that. Especially impressive because, Carlos had the DRS and was basically on his tail for several laps. And you would have thought, by now, like he's in a Ferrari, by now he would have passed. But Fernando held on for as long as he could. Eventually he did get past, but it was a valiant effort.
It was definitely a masterclass, and it shows why Fernando is still known for his racing craft. But now it meant that the Ferraris were fighting.
But did you guys see that onboard of Charles where he left his radio on during his fight with Carlos? Like, it sounded like physically exhausting, which like really puts into perspective, I guess, how much physical effort they have to put in when they're driving, and especially when they're trying to like gain places that I guess you wouldn't necessarily hear or know because they keep their radios off most of the time.
The way his engineer was like, turn off your radio when you get a chance. was just like, he was just like, hey, like, don't forget, you seem to be just exhausted and focusing on racing, but like, we could hear you breathing heavily. Please and thank you. Because I can imagine those engineers don't want to hear someone breathing that heavily, probably the whole race.
But yeah, I feel like, especially for us spectators, it puts into perspective how physically taxing F1 and driving race cars in general is, hearing those like unfiltered, if you will, radios. So I was actually appreciating just hearing him breathe, as crazy as it sounds. But then after we had the Charles radio issue, we also had Fernando getting a puncture and having to pit his car on the last lap and ultimately retiring from the race. The only retirement in that sprint race.
And I guess the incident where that occurred, where Fernando basically just like dive bombed Carlos, and you had like Checo going through. It was kind of giving like the "and through goes Hamilton" from Silverstone, you know, I think a couple years ago now. But it was just kind of sad to see Fernando have to retire, because he really did have a good race, and like it got even worse because he got a 10-second penalty for that. And penalty points. Like, everyone was racking up penalty points, you know, anything, penalty points.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, we'll talk about it when we cover the race, but everyone got penalty points and penalties in general. So, but what happened in race qualifying? Well, pit lane was a mess once again. And honestly, to me, pit lane being a mess, especially during race qualifying, was hilarious because everyone was like queuing, bunching up, and trying to overtake each other in the pit lane, which you're not allowed to do. Because it was a whole thing last year and they basically banned it. And so I don't understand why they're trying to do it now again when they know they're not supposed to. But anyway, Q1, Mercedes on the struggle bus because Lewis ended up in P18. And then, of course, we had Logan with an issue, with a spin to be exact. And as sad as it is, I kind of found it hilarious.
I felt kind of bad because, like, the first thing I thought when they were like yellow flags was like, oh, did Logan spin again? And then it was true, and I was like, no. Because he was actually doing kind of well before then. Like, there was a high chance like he could have made it into Q2 because he was kind of, you know, on par with Alex. But yeah, that it's just a not a good end to Q1 for Logan.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like I speak for a lot of people when I sum up Q1 with the words, how is Hamilton out, but both Alpines are in Q2?
Lewis is just those employees when they give the 2-week notice and like everything's just out the window. Like, he gives no Fs or anything like that. But I did see a meme that killed me where it's like that picture of like Toto talking to Lewis in his car where it's like, Lewis, I told you P1, not Q1. But we love a man of duality because, you know, we saw what Lewis got for the sprint race and he was just like, let me just switch it up and be the back. Why not?
I think, respectfully, Lewis is in his just no shits era. Like, I'm out. I want to do good, but like, don't care because I'm going somewhere else. Sort of like toodaloo. I feel like he's in that era. But I mean, in reference to Alpine, they did bring some upgrades to Shanghai, so we did get to see some of that, and it seems like it's doing something versus the first race they were doing like nada, just like non-existent. So I do give him that. Maybe the celebrity investors into Alpine are like doing something. I don't know.
Yeah, Pierre probably forgot what Q2 felt like because this is his first time making it out of Q1 this entire year, which has probably been extra frustrating because Esteban has. So now they're finally, both have made it through. But yeah, it was just kind of weird seeing them there. I was like, wait a second. You guys are through?
Yeah, it was definitely a mixed bag when it came to who we lost in Q1, which were Logan, Yuki, Lewis, K-Mag, and Zhou. And honestly, Zhou was the most heartbreaking after having a relatively good sprint race.
Yeah, I think I and a lot of other people were rooting for Zhou to make it through Q1 because it was his home race. It was his first home race, even after he's been in F1 for a couple of years. And he really was very, very close. He was P16. And he just barely got knocked out by Checo, of all people, who barely made it through. Not the car I guess you would expect to be down there in P15, but it was a Q1 full of all sorts of surprises.
And honestly, Q2 didn't really disappoint either because that lap for Max, chef's kiss. But then again, it's Max. But what else happened? Well, we got another Ferrari in the wall. This time it was Carlos, which caused a red flag. But thankfully, the car didn't seem too damaged. From what I saw, it was pretty much only the front wing. But what broke my heart was seeing his dad, Carlos Sr., in the garage, just looking like a disappointed teacher. But thankfully, the red flag didn't last long, the damage didn't last that long, and he was able to get going again and put together an amazing lap.
Maybe it's because I watch other series and stuff, but I don't know if it's I don't think it's fair if you crash due to personal error and you cause a red flag, that you're able to just rejoin the session if you can get the car going again, since it definitely ruins kind of everyone's run plans and a lot of people's laps as well, because it stops the session. Everyone has to go back to the pits and then you have to go back out, versus a yellow flag where technically you can keep going on track but you just have to slow down. But because other series like IndyCar have rules where if you cause a red lap in quali, your top 2 times get deleted and you don't get to continue with that session. And it seems like there are some kind of regulations because Aston Martin did file a petition regarding, I think it was something about how long the car is stopped on track before it was able to rejoin, but it looks like the regulations were incredibly vague on this and that they tried to implement a rule or something, but no one could agree on exactly the amount of time, or so it didn't actually get implemented into the rule book. So obviously Carlos was able to rejoin, he was able to set an amazing lap, but hopefully they can kind of clear up this misunderstanding in the rules so that way if this ever happens again, it's just a quick, easy, we know what to do now.
Yeah, I actually heard about a push for that rule change or clarification last year after Miami when Charles put it in the wall during quali, which some of our girls actually witnessed, but nothing came of it. A lot of people back then, I remember, were wanting that if you cause a red flag during quali, you, as Casey said in other series, you're not allowed to continue, no matter how minimal the damage to your car is, which would obviously discourage people from these, dare I say, reckless maneuvers just to get the fastest lap. But who knows? Maybe the FIA will do something now. Maybe they won't. Probably won't, honestly. But so, who got out in Q2? Well, we lost Pierre, Alex, Esteban, Danny, and Lance. So, for Q3, it was somewhat spicy again because Oscar almost put it in the wall in Q3 in the same exact spot as Carlos, but thankfully he was a bit more careful and was able to save his lap. And honestly, Q3 was so chaotic because everyone was on pole for a hot second. But ultimately, it was 100th pole for Red Bull. And for the first time since Mika Hakkinen 25 years ago, it was that a driver takes 5 poles in the first 5 races.
I love how Red Bull's first ever pole as a team was in China, and it was a Red Bull 1-2 plus Fernando, and that their 100th pole is also in China, and it's also a Red Bull 1-2 plus Fernando. So Fernando's just always there throughout the history of Red Bull as a team. So that was just like a fun little coincidence.
I mean, it just goes to show that you can't really separate Red Bull and Fernando, and how long-lasting Fernando is too. But anyway, so everything shook out with Max on pole, Perez in second, Alonso in third, P4 Norris, P5 Piastri, P6 Leclerc, P7 Sainz, P8 Russell, P9 Hulkenberg, and then P10 Bottas. Now, as for the race, there was some pre-racing stuff that happened, such as Fernando being penalized with a 10-second time penalty and 3 penalty points for his sprint race incident that we covered. And then Logan, it was announced, would be starting from the pit lane because they did some setup changes overnight. And then let's go racing. So, what happened? Well, first off, Alonso's attack into turn 1 was just beautiful.
Yeah, it was kind of like flashbacks to the sprint race where Lando tried to do that, and Alonso was like, here, my young Padawan, like, here's how you do the overtake in turn 1. But yeah, like, I don't know where he got the speed. He was just like zooming around the corner.
He literally said, I am speed, and I will show you how it's done. Because watching Alonso battle it out like with Lando and Max at the start of the race was just poetic. It was so satisfying to watch, like, him like keep up the pace for that like opening lap. I would love to rewatch it.
Yeah, it was definitely beautiful, but sadly, Fernando would later pay for it with his tire dig. But before that happens, can we talk about what happened to the Ferraris? Because everyone thought they were going to be speedy this weekend, but apparently the speed just wasn't there because they were a bit too close together at the start, and Carlos went wide to avoid any issues with Charles, which allowed George to come through.
So it seems like the Ferrari boys were just having communications issues all weekend. They really need to sort it out between their drivers and their engineers and all that stuff, because at this point it's just costing the team as a whole points in the constructors. And I don't think anyone from the Ferrari side wants that.
I feel like no one that is a Ferrari fan or connected to Ferrari in any shape or form wants that. But they weren't the only ones struggling, because Lewis and Fernando were both struggling with their tires, which, I mean, due to Fernando's masterclass at the beginning, was kind of a given for him, but it sadly turned him into a sitting duck. And then, of course, Charles's overtake on George on lap 9, just a thing of beauty.
A true work of art, really. I love seeing that man do his overtakes.
And Fernando wasn't the only one that decided to pit early. Zhou, Nico, and Yuki also decided to go in.
And war is over, guys. Sauber finally had a decent pit stop. It was 3 seconds. That's normal. It wasn't 30 seconds. It wasn't like 5 seconds. They finally pulled it together for Zhou's home race and had a good pit stop.
But someone that didn't have a good pit stop was Pierre. And it led to a steward's investigation for an unsafe release.
Yeah, so I saw like the tire guy just go flying off to the side, and then like the car move forward a bit. And those tires are very heavy, and having to also avoid just getting run over must have been insane. Luckily, he was okay, and Pierre also asked about him on the radio. Can't imagine being a driver and like accidentally hurting one of your pit crew, but it's a dangerous job, so props to all the pit crew people that do that. Also, speaking of pit stops, Red Bull decided to just come in and change tires because they could, and they did a double stop on lap 14 that was like honestly like one of the greatest double stops, because Max's first stop was 2.1 seconds, followed by Checo with a 2-second stop. It was just great to see.
Oh, to be Red Bull and do a pit stop just for funsies, because they can. And yeah, they're able to.
While those pit stops were beautiful, can we talk also about something beautiful? Logan running in 9th for a hot second. I thought my F1 TV honestly was messing up like the leaderboard thing.
No, Logan was really popping off a bit in this race today, and I was loving it because I also always root for Logan. He was making some quick overtakes, and it was just nice like seeing him just like make those little moves, because I was like, yes, Logie, like do it, go.
Sadly, it didn't last that long. And then, of course, also Valtteri went off the road with his engine gone. But because the car was stuck in gear, it took forever to get the car to safety and get him to safety as well, which caused a virtual safety car to be deployed.
Yeah, it was crazy how late it took them to deploy the VSC, because they showed like that shot of Valtteri like getting out of his car, and you could just see the cars like coming straight at him in that corner at full speed. And if anybody had locked up, they would have like slammed right into like him, the car, the marshals, and everything like that. So it's crazy that there wasn't even like a virtual safety car at that point. So yeah, hopefully like those kinds of things should be like immediate, virtual safety car. And because as Ito mentioned, like it was stuck in gear, it took them a while to get it off track. So it did turn into an actual safety car as well. And of course that caused everyone into like diving into the pits.
I just want to know what needs to happen for the FIA to poner las pilas, to like hurry up and make those type of decisions quicker, because it's not only the safety of the drivers, but also like the marshals, and then you also have the spectators too. So like, come on now, like I get it, like communication and stuff, but like again, what else needs to happen? So much has happened already. What else do they like? What's going on?
Honestly, it almost feels like they forgot what happened in 2014. But on a lighter note, during the virtual safety car, Lando was not told that to come into pit at the beginning of the virtual safety car. He was told too late, basically, and he therefore missed the pit entrance to get a pit stop in.
Well, it was finalized right before, like they finalized like the virtual safety car was coming out right as he passed the window to the pit lane, which hence why in a post-race interview he had mentioned, and he stated that he was really, really mad about that. And then frustration doesn't even put it lightly. And then in reference to Melissa, the FIA just needs to start FIAing, like please and thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Lando and Charles were the ones with like the longest tire lives. So, of course, they had to pit, and the safety car was the ideal scenario. So, Charles pitted, and then Lando pitted on the next lap, still under virtual safety car, which, as Casey mentioned, eventually would turn into a full safety car, which weirdly enough, the Red Bulls also used to pit both cars again.
Yeah, Red Bull and their pit stop times is something to be admired. They know how to run a tight ship with that, and they need to share their secrets with the other teams. Sauber, I'm looking at you, and Mercedes too.
Hey, Sauber did not do as bad as I thought they were this weekend, so I will give them that. But in reference to Red Bull, they did have the 4 best pit stops all weekend, and with one of them being 1.9, which is just phenomenal. And then I think the closest one to that was like a 2.1, if I'm not mistaken, but all 4 of them were just really close together, like really meticulous and really great to see.
Others that went into pit were Alonso going on softs. Hulk and Sargent also ended up being investigated for safety car infringements because they were trying to overtake, which is a no-no. And of course, then on the restart, we had Yuki and K-Mag going at it, as well as Stroll into the back of Ricardo.
Yeah, it looked like they had like their little, train going on, and somebody in the front, like Carlos, something slowed down, and of course they all slowed down, and then it backed everyone up, but then Lance just wasn't paying attention and just ran. It looked like Looney Tunes, like, Danny's cars went like straight up in the air, and it all happened so fast too. It's like all 1 second, they're just safety car, and then wham, big accident. But yeah, that was not great.
Yeah, that was just like a whole domino effect with the drivers, because it was just, one after the other. And if you ask me, in my humble opinion, Lance, maybe you need to work on those reaction reflex skills, if you ask me. That's all I can say. I get accidents happen, but maybe a little practice will help you.
The way Ricardo was like, I was watching the front. Why should I have to watch the back too? Did it for me. Because like, he's not wrong. You can't be both places, seeing both places at the same time. So I agree, Mel, Lance should have eased off just a tad. I get wanting to beat a place, dominate on the grid, things like that, but hey, this could have resulted in a non-DNF if you had just taken the time to ease off just a tad.
Yeah, and in all of that chaos, we also had a Yuki spin.
Yeah, I think he basically got taken out by K-Mag. And Yuki had been having a great race as well. Like, he started at the back and he was making his way forward. But it was just not a great day for VCARB. Double retirement. Not what they needed, especially when like the back, teams are all fighting for, those final like 1-2 points. So a double retirement is not what any team is looking for.
Word to Crofty on the broadcast today. RB stands for really bad as for their race in Shanghai. That had me dead, and I don't wish that. DNFing sucks already, but DNFing in the fashion that they both had to.
Yeah, and they weren't the only ones that limped back to the pits, dare I say, because Kevin and Lance limped back as well. And that whole restart fiasco actually brought out another safety car. Thankfully, that safety car period went rather smooth, and so did the restart. But it meant that Logan, Kevin, and Stroll all ended up with 10-second penalties because of chaos during restart number 1.
Well, I definitely believe that, Lance's 10-second penalty was deserved. He caused a collision, can't go around that. That's what happened. The hate I've been seeing, on, comments and all of this stuff on the internet is just absolutely insane. I think if it had been any other driver, the reaction, I guess wouldn't have been as extreme. But I don't know why, like, just because maybe your favorite driver got taken out, you feel the need to, like, bully and threaten people in comments on Instagram. It just seems a little crazy. And it's never okay to just kind of, like, cyberbully anyone on the internet. But with, like, the journalist was also, like, honestly baiting Daniel Ricciardo in a post-race interview with, like, Lance's in-race radio, which, of course, the in-race radios, they're always full of adrenaline. They can only see their perspective, so that anything can basically come out. But that, like, didn't really help the situation. But yeah, it just seemed like a lot of bad vibes all over.
Yeah, I think it also doesn't help that we hear all those radios during the race, and we as fans can understand what they're saying in the heat of the moment for something completely different than what they're trying to, like, convey or, like, just trying to express in general. We know how Twitter gets. So yeah, but I understand the frustration from both individuals. Y'all know what I said about Lance, so we'll leave it at that.
I agree here, and I've learned and I've had to learn myself and more that there's adrenaline and is so heightened during that moment, haven't even had time to process or observe what really happened. And I do think Ricardo did handle the situation to the bait from the reporter very well. As you could tell, he was stopping himself from going off despite his frustration on the situation. But I do agree with Casey. Fans shouldn't go off on drivers or people just because they feel like they can. Like, we need to remember that these people are human beings and keep it at that.
Honestly, it was kind of exciting to watch because if you had just, like, popped on and saw that, you would have thought they were fighting for, like, P10, you know, for the points. They were really going at it. But they both had 10-second penalties, and they were all the way at the back. But they were still giving it, 100%, even though they knew there were no points on the line.
Yeah, sadly for those two, there were no points, but there were points for Hulkenberg and Hamilton, and their fight for P9, chef's kiss.
Yeah, P18 to P9 was pretty impressive for Hamilton, seeing as how he kind of hates that car. And he's definitely not happy with it. Like, he's counting the days until the last time he has to drive the W15 and he can finally switch over to Ferrari. Like, these past couple years with the Mercedes cars have just not been a good time.
Lewis was really putting in work per usual in that tractor of a car, if we can call it that at this point. But he's definitely not the only one counting down those days where he makes the switch to Ferrari because, I can't take it anymore. And we have how many races left?
You have 19 races left, honey. But also, what is it with the gravel traps in China? Because now Alonso put a wheel in it too, in pretty much the same spot that Carlos and Oscar were in it already. Thankfully, it wasn't much to cry home about, as he very quickly got out of there and basically just had, like, some dust and debris on one of the wheels. And he, thankfully, after that incident, overtook Hamilton and Piastri very quickly, too.
I must say Alonso's quick thinking when all that went down is something to be noted because that man really just said skirt skirt and, like, made his way back. His reaction skills, reflex skills, top notch, I must say.
I mean, he's called a rookie for a reason. But a skillful rookie, let's put it that way. But can we talk about how after the race was done, Lando went into the pit entrance instead of on the grid where the top three finishers were supposed to go? That was just top-notch Lando comedy for me.
I mean, the last time he raced in China, he was, like, a baby. So I guess it makes sense. Like, a lot of times they do go to the pits for, the top three. But I don't know if you guys also saw, but he put on the P3 hat, even though he got P2. And then he sat in the P1 chair of the cool-down room. So chaos all around. He's just, a chaotic little guy.
Yeah, he was like, where do I go? What do I do? Who do I see? That man was all chaotic and confused. I think that man needed like instructions written and help.
And it wasn't just Lando that was his, dare I say, cute self. It was also Zhou who was crying getting out of his car on, and honestly, heartbreaking. So cute.
Yeah, I'm so glad he finally got to race in front of his home crowd. And he looked a bit overwhelmed, with all the fans there that were so supportive of him. And then you could even hear like the cheers in the broadcast whenever he like came into the pits. So that was kind of cute too.
I'm just so happy that Zhou got his chance to be the star for the weekend and finish the race. And I especially love that they had a special spot for him in Park Ferme. I think that was a really nice touch done by the track.
Yeah, and seeing that happen and then seeing all the photos from him or about him that weekend honestly made me tear up because that man deserves the world. And seeing him in Shanghai and getting to experience that, it's got to be one of a kind.
And this was also Max's first win in China, which now puts him at 26 circuits that he has won on, and that's only 5 behind Hamilton's record. So with all the new track, changes and everything like that, who knows if he might be able to, match that.
He definitely will be beating that record soon enough. I see it happening, and I mean, what other records are there for Max to break, or at this point set, if we're being honest?
Yeah, Max is putting himself in a position to kind of go down in history as one of the best alongside Hamilton. I mean, Schumacher, Senna, Vettel, Prost, etc. We can keep talking, but it's pretty remarkable to see.
Now that we've finished race talk, let's talk about our predictions for Miami because that one's coming up. I obviously consulted my magic dice again, and it gave me a top 3 of George Russell, Oscar Piastri, and Yuki Tsunoda. Now, is this realistic? I mean, George has won a race before, Brazil 2022, and Oscar has been on the podium a bunch, so those two seem realistic. But on the other hand, Yuki, I don't think so, especially not in that RB. But we'll see what happens. My gut says we get a 2-part special of the Verstappen podcast in 2 weeks because, yet again, it is a sprint race.
Yeah, and because it's a sprint race, I'm excited for the chaos to continue. Because I think just having the one practice section definitely makes it a bit more unpredictable sometimes. But Miami is notoriously hot and humid as well. So I'm curious to see how the cars do that typically do better in the colder temperatures. But I predict that Max will be P1 because it's Max. And then Hopium is strong. So hoping Charles will get P2. Just want to see him back on the podium. And I think Checo will be able to get P3. Miami was kind of the start of Checo's downward spiral last year, but I think now he's a lot more comfortable with his role in the team.
I am looking forward to Miami because it's a stateside race. I am looking forward to it being in our time zone and no more 1, 2, or 3 a.m. races. Aside from Max winning the races, which we know will happen, I don't think I want to make any more predictions this round on that. I just want to enjoy the race weekend. I love that Miami energy and everything. So just looking forward to a good time and everything that leads up to that.
Like Mel said, I'm very happy for a race that is in our time zone because 2, 3 a.m. in the mornings for me are just rough. Now for Miami, I'm all for the vibes, and I'll be a little realistic here. I think we will see Max up top. But I've been very pleasantly surprised by Ferrari and their pace, even McLaren's as well. So my P2 and P3, I think, are going to be Carlos and Lando. But I wouldn't be upset if Lewis is up there. And with that, welcome to Miami. Let's go.
And some stuff, real quick, was going on, some fun stuff in DC over the weekend for Leanne and I. We had the Red Bull show run take over the nation's capital, and I must say that was probably one of the coolest things I got to see and experience. Essentially, The RB19 came to DC a few weeks ago and was like on display at like a hotel down here. And during the weekend, they just had like a little showcase of like different motorsports with different activities. And they had demonstrations of the RB9 driven by David Coulthard. That was awesome and loud. And other cars from like Rally, MotoGP, even karting with their respective drivers. Definitely something I would recommend for fans of motorsports to check out when they come to a city near you, because that, again, was really, really cool. And to close out the episode, we have a driver of the week for you. And who is it? None other than Joe Granu. How exciting is it for Joe to not only attend the Grand Prix growing up, but then later in his life to race the Grand Prix? Love seeing the support he got over the weekend. It was very well deserved.
So thank you for joining us this week on another race recap, everyone. Join us in the next episode where we're talking all about Drive to Survive and what we thought about the latest season. Let us know who you want us to cover next on our socials. We are the Paddock Girls Podcast everywhere except Twitter. There we are, Paddock Girls Pod. See you next time. Bye.
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 Bye.